So before we move into the chapter about time and rhythm in music, also space and place again, but from another point of view, I just want to just show you something that becomes more and more important as time goes on. And John Cage, we percussionists love him because of the things he wrote for us. But he was also expanding continually how music could be. And in Water Walk, which he wrote for himself, he uses many things that have water in them. He also uses a piano. And he brings in radios, 5 of them. And the particular performance that you will see, if you maybe we'll look at the end of that, where he flings the radios onto the floor. So one could be thinking, why would somebody throw radios off of a table? Now it's maybe normal. We say performance art. We've thrown pianos off of stages. We've thrown instruments from windows. It became part of the movement called Fluxus, that we destroy things. But actually his intention was not destruction. His intention was reclaiming the integrity of his own composition. Because the world doesn't always let you do what you want. The conditions of the world aren't always those that you can regulate. He was invited to the studio. I've Got a Secret. He was Gary Moore was the host. He was invited to the studio, which is anyway outrageous. And actually, I've Got a Secret was a show where people have to guess what you do. But they were so fascinated by his process when he went to this show that they said, we're not even going to guess what you do. We just want to watch you do it. So they made a studio available to this man to set up his Water Walk, his little piece. And he probably needed all day to do it. And then just before the show began, there was an argument between the stage union and the electrical union of New York City, and they couldn't solve the problem. So nobody was around who was authorized to plug the radio in. He needed electricity. The piece needs 5 radios that get turned on and create a sound. And then you need to turn them off, but he couldn't plug them in. And so to keep the integrity of his composition in this time, which meant probably nothing to anybody but him, he made a choice to tap the radio, which also made a sound. Now, as listeners, we have to imagine that even after he tapped it, the sound is going on. And we don't realize that the sound has been going on until he flings the radio off the table to turn it off. And I just think that lesson is so strong, because it's not about destruction. It's about being true to me in spite of all the terrible things that might happen. And how do we compromise and still keep our own inner belief in what we have to do? That's a great model even today. thing. And so one of the things percussionists have to deal with all the time is the time it takes to get from one thing to the next. So we're dealing in physical time, like here and here. And then what if I want to play the window? It takes an amount of time for me to get to the window. So we can't even think about time without thinking about space. But then it's terribly interesting to, now we jump to Christian's music again, which means that sound travels, and I can't play until your sound has moved across the space and then left. So time becomes space and sound at the same time. Time, time, time. So I always think that word is so interesting because the time it takes to do this, or the time it takes to do that, or the time it takes to feel a pulse, the time it takes to get inside what we're doing and the moment, the time it takes to reflect on something that happened long ago, and the time it takes to consider the fact that it might still be resonating into the future. On top of that, we have this weird clock that somebody's come up with at some point and decided that if we have a clock, we are able to regulate time. But nobody can. We say time is running away. Time does not run away. We say I can't keep up with it. That's not the point. It's never the point. It's never the time that's the issue. It's always us that's the issue. So even if I'm trying to follow a clock, it's still me that has to deal with that sense of time. You might notice in that little film, Mr. Cage has I still use a stopwatch like that. It's a little tiny round object that ticks. And you can see that Mr. Cage is walking around a little bit handicapped because his left hand is always containing a watch so that everything he does can be precise. So we have clock time, which can make us, his early pieces were incredibly precise according to clock time. Make this sound at 1 minute and 27 seconds. Make this sound at 5 minutes and 30 seconds. So if we're doing the early Cage pieces, it's like, oh my God, 1 minute 29. I'm too late, I missed it. So we're practicing always against time. I'm too late or I'm too early. And how do I be precise? So when you're doing the 27 minutes, the solo piece for a percussionist, it's like I'm either behind time or I'm sitting there going, oh man, I gotta wait a minute before I can play. Or we're going, oh, I was way too fast. What am I gonna do now? I still have to wait. So the clock it's useful and it keeps us on time in the music, but it also, it also completely, it's terrifying. I think it's sometimes terrifying because we can't keep up with it. And so you rehearse with that clock over and over and over and over. And what do you discover when you come out the other end? You don't need it. So I use it to figure out all these moves. How much time does it take to do this or this or this? Can I do it faster? And then pretty soon, time is in me. And everything in my body understands what it has to do to be on time. Crazy. Here we are on time because that's where we are. Clock time, Cage time. We use it often to try to regulate things from the outside, but I always have a problem with that because I think he used it as a way for us to internalize certain rhythms and certain pulses that are probably too difficult to understand. So before we had his idea of clock time, we had a metronome, which helped us, once again, regulate time. But it comes from outside. So once again, something outside of us is telling us where time is. So we practice, and if we're pretty good, we learn how to internalize also metronomic time. And the greatest thing is, if I can associate something, my body will remember it, but I need to always have a hook so that my head is with my body. And now I can be in what we call pulse or groove. Drummers have to, that's also part of what we do. We haven't done a lot of that this week, but part of what we do is also we play in time together. In time, in the groove, in the pulse. I'm just only reflecting on that because when you move into a lot of the Christian Wolff music, the first thing that most people say is, where is the groove? Where's the time? I don't understand the time, because in his music, the time really is defined by the duration. So we get into what I like to call the integrity of the sound. Every sound has a kind of a, I don't want to be totally metaphysical, but it does have a life. And it is up to me as a professional, or even if I'm not a professional, but if my job is to play a sound, it's up to me to figure out how that can be done. We percussionists mostly use our hands, use our fingers. We use sticks. We use our bodies. We let something ring. We let something else ring. And the time it takes is, in this sense of the word, our duration. So duration is the time it takes. And the time it takes us away from everything that's outside and puts us inside. So the next step in learning about nothing is to be able to accept the time it takes. I can control it. I can control it. Not so much the duration, but the time it takes to. Christian loves stones. And he also uses stones for the time it takes. He's not a very good drummer, so he'll go. So his stuff always sounds very raw when he plays it. But it's still about the time it takes. And because we spend our lives holding things, caressing things, rubbing things, and beating on things, I think we're the best example and model of time, because we carry it